Sorry, I just need to take on my watch as well.
Ready to go.
I'm just so terribly excited.
On the Dallas Opera Network, you're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Hey, wherever you are, however you're listening, it's Opera Box Score. I'm your host, George Cederquist, joined on America's talk radio show about opera by Oliver Camacho, Weston Williams, Ashlee Hardgrave, and Matt Cummings. All right, this week we dribble you through the other two regions of the Operaland March Madness bracket, the classical and romantic regions, all leading up to the grand finale on next week's show. Do not miss. Then, 2-minute drill. Exit stage right, James Levine, plus Tulsa Opera cancels a commission by a black composer written to commemorate the Tulsa Massacre. Oliver Camacho, it's been a crazy week since I last saw you. How's it going?
It's been great. And, for our audience, we record on Mondays, and it's been a week that's been crazy full of opera news. So much so that we're pushing our interview with Carrie Ann Matheson to next week. I already got her permission. She's fine with it. So for those of you tuning in today to hear Carrie Ann, that will be next week.
Weston Williams, what's new?
Oh, I'm just going to say that I'm sure that you'll all miss the little Animojis that we were last week. We did have a little technical glitch last time, but we got through it. And as the audiovisual editor, it was fine. I just, sometimes you just have to take life as it comes at you, you know? And that's where I've been for the past week.
I was waiting for my avatar to look like Little Orphan Annie, which was the third grade joke people made about me.
Buddy.
Matt Cummings, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. I've been reminiscing a lot about remembering what it was like to live in Rogers Park for when Loyola went as far as they did in March Madness 2 years ago, and just how weird it is that I'm not surrounded by cheering at all times.
I'm sure Ashlee is also feeling weirdness that the Razorbacks have gone so deep into this.
What is it? Is it Woo Pig Suey? Is it Woo Pig Suey? Is it Bud Walton Marina?
What could it be?
All of the different logos for the Razorbacks? Why?
There's that Zoom production value that OBS is known and cherished for.
No, in all seriousness, this is very, very exciting. Again, Arkansas is not a place, Gesundheit, Oral Roberts Camacho. Arkansas is not a place that has any sort of professional sports teams or allegiances. So the entire 2.5 million person state gets behind the Division I team. So when they're good, which is not often, everybody's very excited. They won a shocking nail-biter against Texas Tech last night, which means they are officially in the Sweet 16. The Hogs are in the Sweet 16. Nothing else matters to me. Nothing in opera. Okay, maybe a little bit, but officially nothing else matters to me this week.
All right, let's talk some opera.
Chalk Talk on Opera Box Score.
Week 2 of 3 of March Madness continues on the OBS. The bracket is on our website, operaboxscore.com. Half the bracket, which is also behind me on this amazing whiteboard, has been filled out.
Spectacular.
We got another half to fill out, and then on the show next week, we are going to walk you through all these competitions. Of course, let us know what you're thinking, operaboxscore@gmail.com. We're in the classical and romantic divisions. We're going to kick it off. Matt Cummings, who is your dark horse classical opera pick?
Okay, this dark horse might sound familiar to you Opera Box Score stands out there, because I have mentioned it on this show before. But I'm going with Luigi Cherubini's opera Medea.
Ooh.
Or Médée, because it was originally composed in French. This is an opera that isn't strictly overlooked, but it's definitely not respected as the kind of piece of work that it actually is. It's got a reputation for being a diva vehicle, because the main person who has sung the role in the 20th century is the great Maria Callas. That's who we played singing it last time we talked about this. You might have heard of her, Maria Callas.
Callas, it's pronounced Callas.
More or less.
Like on the okay.
But this is it's an opera that has a little bit of a complicated history. It was originally composed in French, then it had to but it's mostly been performed in Italian. And when you have these kind of competing versions of a work, a lot of times it's hard to, sit down and take it all in at once, because you got bleeding chunks of it that are being excised by conductors who think that this goes better over there. Stresses aren't in the right place. You got dialogue, you've got recitatives. Which one is better? It's hard to know. When you take a look at the actual critical edition of the score that was reconstructed with what Cherubini actually meant to be performed, it is a staggeringly effective piece of theater, piece of music that tells the story of the Greek sorceress Medea, whose husband Jason was going to leave her for someone else, and in her thirst for vengeance ends up murdering their children and burning down the temple. So you got a lot of drama here. You got a lot of character. It's visceral. It has a lot of the same kind of touches that you might recognize from Mozart, but I think there's a lot more fire in it. And, there's nothing wrong with it being a diva role, but it's definitely not just a diva role.
All right, let's see how it's going to fare against Weston's classical pick.
I'm going a little out of this world for this pick, if you'll pardon the extremely funny pun.
I will
which
not.
You can tell because everyone is laughing so uproariously at it. My pick is Haydn's seminal
Oliver looks
classic.
like he just ate a sock.
My pick is Haydn's seminal classic, Il Mondo della Luna, The World on the Moon. Now, this is, I will say, there's a certain disadvantage I have in this category because I am not a big classical guy. I'm, all the rigid forms and sort of stock characters and stuff don't really appeal to me because, I'm all about the early romantics sort of breaking everything, which should surprise no one. But I've always thought that Il Mondo della Luna is a great alternative to like your Così fan tutte sort of, comedies. It's a lot of works from the period. The plot doesn't really matter. It's pretty predictable. The characters are pretty stock characters. There's the clever young protagonists, a lecherous old man. There's romance. Basically what happens is Eccolito, who's a fake astronomer, tricks Buonafede, who's the lecherous old man, into thinking that the moon is populated by sexy women who will do anything a man tells them to. And of course, this becomes a plot to marry Buonafede's daughter, Clarice. And everything basically happens as you would think. They fool him into thinking that he's on the moon. Someone dresses up as the emperor of the moon. They have a little ballet sequence with these moon people.
I'm not following any of the plot.
It doesn't
Why
matter.
did you pick this opera?
Well, the thing about it is that a lot of the operas from this time period have a certain, shall we say, uncomfortable element to them in terms of how they view non-Western cultures. The Orientalism is real, folks. And the whole idea of women who are sexy and exotic and will do anything a man tells them to, very Orientalist. However, I think there's a very interesting reading of this opera which takes that lack of knowledge about other cultures that Western Europe had at the time and placing it in the context of this fake moon society has a lot of really, really good satirical potential. And honestly, it's got some bops in there. I love Haydn. I think he's extremely underrated as a composer. He's got a lot of the energy of Beethoven, but he's having a good time. And I just have a real soft spot for this opera, and that's why it's my pick for this bracket.
Moving on to the bottom half of the classical region, Oliver Camacho.
I'm going to pick an opera I've never heard before, but
Ooh.
I have a good feeling about it. It's called The Anonymous Lover, and it's by Joseph Bologne, the Chevalier de Saint-Georges. LA Opera recently staged it, and I think they also inserted an aria that has been recorded by Paul Freeman in his 1974-1978 collection of important Black classical composers. There's an aria from an opera called Ernestine, and the fragment exists, and they inserted that into the 1780 chamber opera by Joseph Bologna, The Anonymous Lover, or L'Amant Anonyme. So I haven't heard it, but I'm really interested in the career of Joseph Bologna. He is sometimes referred to as the Black Mozart, and that's very insulting. Why do we have to center everything around white people? And I love Mozart, so don't get me wrong, but Joseph Boulogne was a French composer of Caribbean descent. He's from Guadeloupe. And he also served as a general. He led an army, I think, of like 1,000 troops. He was a colonel. He led a troop of 1,000 soldiers. He led the Black troop, of course. He was a violinist and composer. He was composing from a very young age. He studied fencing. Like, he just has a super interesting, life story. And he did spend a little bit of time with Mozart. I think that they shared the same apartment in France for like a month or two. There's some story about that. And Mozart was inspired to compose his famous Sinfonia Concertante after hearing Boulogne's music. So who influenced who is the question. So I want to put a composer of color into this bracket. And, we are in a time when the Golden Globes and the Oscars are all getting, woke. So I think the March Madness opera bracket also is going to get woke. L'Amant Anonyme by Joseph Boulogne.
And that pick is going up against Ashlee's classical choice.
And as the resident lady on the panel, both of my picks this week are a little lady-centric in different ways. My classical pick is Rossini's La Donna del Lago, because who doesn't love a little lady of the lake? A nice little bit of feminine mysticism that has to do with a large body of water. So La Donna del Lago is the first Italian opera that was going to be based on Sir Walter Scott's Romantic works. 24 and some change later, we get to Donizetti's Lucia, but this was the first one. So at this point, like, romantic tales about the Scottish Highlands were all the rage. Think Brigadoon before Brigadoon. This stuff is better than Brigadoon because most things are better than Brigadoon. But at any rate, for an opera about civil war in the Highlands, this is relatively muted and tame, but it is very lovely. In terms of the music, it is a real definition for me of bel canto. You can, if you have an incredibly fire tenor and a high lady voice of any classification that moves, you're going to have an amazing night at the opera if you're seeing Donna del Lago. The Met did sort of a lukewarmly received production of this in 2015. But for my money, do anything that you can to get your hands on a copy of Joyce DiDonato with any orchestra at any time in any place, singing anything from La Donna del Lago. I love, love, love DiDonato as anything in La Donna del Lago. So that's my pick. Rossini's
She could sing the tenor role in La Donna del Lago.
She could sing the phone book. She's another phone book singer for me.
The tenor line is high enough that she really could sing it, though.
She really could. That's why I said you got to get a fire tenor. So it's one of the like Rossini's that you don't think about, and that's why I'm a fan.
I just want to make sure that our referee is going to allow an opera from 1819 to go into this bracket, or are they being redshirted?
I will allow to go
Oral
forward.
Roberts Camacho. How dare you?
Actually, we're going to stick with you as we move into the last region, the romantic region, with your choice.
Well, I said we were on a lady train, and now we are staying on
Get
it.
me off! Get me off!
I'm sorry, Oral Roberts Camacho. I'm never going to call you anything but that, by the way. That's your name forever. So we have a lot of different operas about Cinderella. You probably know Massenet, Cendrillon. But do you know about my gal, Pauline Viardot? Eventually Pauline Viardot Garcia. But Pauline Viardot wrote a beautiful version of French Cendrillon. I mean, technically it's a little bit few years past the cutoff because it premiered in 1904. Oral Roberts, don't come for me. This one stays. She was part of this, Viardot, the composer, was part of this vocal dynasty. Her father was in the premiere of Barbara of Seville, the premiere, and he invented the laryngoscope. So, she became a singer and a composer to, nobody's shock. During her retirement, after she had been a singer, she started composing for the students that she had in her vocal studio, these like small scale operas. And that's one of the places where this Cendrillon came from. It was a way for her to create pieces specifically for the singers she had, to challenge them, to give them exercises to sort of work out the parts of their voice that they needed some attention on. So I thought that was very, very cool. If you've, just in general, if you haven't heard a lot of Yardot, get your hands on some of it. It's really lovely. She's got a really special place in my heart. The music of this Cendrillon specifically, it's very charming. It's very her. It's pretty complicated for something that was going to be like a student opera. The coloratura range of the soprano, bonkers. It is just bonkers. If you can get your hands on an aria from it, just sit back and let it happen to you. It is out of this world. The plot is a little bit different from the story that you know. So Cinderella reads about a fairy tale prince before she ever meets one in this one. Her late father is revealed to have this like sketchy checkered past, and that is what makes the prince's attraction to her all the more scandalous, because before it was like Cinderella's dad was wealthy, but then her stepmom made her a servant. But it turns out she was kind of noble all along, so when she gets with the prince, it's not that big of a deal. But in this one, it's far more scandalous because she came from like sketchy folk. So that was one of the things about it that I thought was kind of interesting. Nobody really does this, and it makes me a little bummed. I think Caramoor, like 20 years ago, was one of the last productions that I could find. Still, it's a story that you know. It's got some surprises. The music is French, and it's lush, and it's elegant, and it's virtuosic, and most importantly, it's composed by a lady, Pauline Viardot's Cendrillon.
Lush and elegant, definitely not words I would use to describe Weston, but he is going to pick the opera that's going up against Ashlee. Romantic choice, what's it going to be, Weston?
Well, it's kind of funny that we went the sort of the female composer route, because I feel like you've already one-upped me a little bit here. But my pick is Paul Dukas' Ariane and Barbe Bleue, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. I'm sure Oliver will correct me at some point. But it means Ariana and Bluebeard. Not to add another Ariana to the list.
So many.
But when we were kind of like creating this list of dark horses, I wanted to think of something that was specifically an alternative to a classic. And one of my favorite operas is Bluebeard's Castle by Bartók. He's my go-to first opera suggestion.
Which, from most people, is also a dark horse, but
yeah, well, that's my common mainstream. This is good for everyone. Bring the whole family. But it's based on the Bluebeard legend, of course. There are many, many variations on it. But Ariane and Bluebeard is based on another iteration of that legend, and it's very, very different. The thing that I really like about this is that Dukas was something of a proto-feminist or a first-wave feminist, which is very unusual for a male composer of that period, or really any period prior to 1990, if we're being real about it. It's very, very interesting because the character of Ariana is the polar opposite of Judith in Bluebeard's Castle. Whereas Judith is just another victim who's going to wind up, spoilers, in, his little vault underneath the castle. Judith is basically like basically all of the wives have been disappearing. The peasantry are up in arms. They're like, what's going on in there? And Ariana's like, I'll go find out. I'm just going to go in. I'm going to ask him. I'm going to rescue them. And she goes in along with her maid, who's very funny. She freaks out over everything. But Ariana's just like pulling open doors, not scared of anything. She really reminds me of a Helden tenor a la Siegfried, which is not a character dynamic you see a lot in opera. So think woman Siegfried just barging in, going for it. And the cool thing is, even though it's Bluebeard's Castle, his name is in the title, he sings for like 2 minutes. Not an exaggeration. Less than 2 minutes. And she monopolizes the rest of it. You spend more time with the wives who have been captured. She rescues them. She talks to them. She offers to take them up to the surface. But interestingly, there's some social commentary here, because you have to remember, this is first wave feminism. It's just sort of bubbling to the surface. Women do not have the right to vote yet, really, in France or in America or really anywhere in Europe at this point. There was a lot of fear amongst people who were like, oh, we don't want to rock the boat too much. We don't want to ask for too much. So a lot of these wives choose to stay down with Bluebeard despite their rescue, which is a really sort of like kind of a disturbing moment because you've like been following this journey of Ariana to rescue them and you support her and she's great. But she like respects their decision and she goes out by herself, just like the badass she is. And it's such an interesting opera and it needs to be played all over the place. And the music is amazing. It's big. It's, very Sorcerer's Apprentice-y, but a little bit more harmonically adventurous. Lots of really beautiful French orchestration.
I can think of many things that are more harmonically adventurous than Sorcerer's Apprentice.
So you're saying, Weston, that the role of Bluebeard in this show is shorter than your description of the opera.
Oh, absolutely! Like not a joke. He's got like 3 lines. It's great. I love this
say
opera.
That in the original screenplay to Pretty Woman, the Richard Gere character actually took the Julia Roberts character to see Bluebeard's Castle.
Oh, that's right.
But they
they
had to make it more audience friendly. So Traviata,
Nice little tidbit there.
That would have given it a lot more like weight with the jewel, the snappy snap jewel.
One more pair to figure out here. We're going to throw it over to Matt Cummings for his romantic pick.
I also am following in the steps of, a generous definition of romantic. But most of the romantic era composers are the ones who get too much attention anyway. So we're fine like broadening those borders a little bit.
Fair.
I have picked the opera by Leos Janáček, Jénufa, which
choice.
straddles the romantic and early modern era, and Janáček's thing, he was a Czech composer in a time when there weren't a ton of non-German, non-French, non-Italian composers that were really given the same kind of attention, prestige. He's in like a little bit of a later generation to Dvorak maybe, but what he really did was he wanted to capture the text of ordinary people and make his music sound like natural Czech speakers were doing it. And so what really happens when you have a composer trying to write something like that is that this feels like a play. The action like waxes and wanes on a moment's notice. There are no arias. It is a very difficult story to describe without a family tree because it involves multiple cousins that are maybe going to marry each other, but also not going to marry each other. But the drama that it encompasses about a pregnant woman who may or may not be able to find a suitable match in a town at a time where that meant everything, and the choices that everyone has to make to both save their family honor and make sure that they have enough money to survive the winter. It is very moving. It is extremely powerful, and I'm a stan.
Oliver Camacho, round out the bracket.
I just want the referee to note that Jénufa premiered in 1904, and Ariana Barbula premiered in 1906. So anyway, I'm going to go with Bellini's I Capuletti e Montecchi. This is an opera that most sopranos know exists because they have worked on the cavatina of Juliet. This is one of the most terrifying arias ever written. It is basically a cappella. There is a harp and one of the most, archetypal bel canto cantilenas to sing. This is an aria that can bore audiences to tears and win the BBC Cardiff Singer of the World competition. So it's just one of those pieces that, like, if you sing it well and you understand what bel canto means, it can really go right to the heart. And it has more recitative than it has cantilena, which I always love about this period. There's also a great role for Romeo, who is sung by a mezzo-soprano, keeping that tradition of the Baroque and classical eras of having the romantic voices be very close in tessitura, which went away later on in the Romantic period. But then we see, like in French opera, for example, soprano and very high tenor, which can get to those thirds and sixth harmonies that we find in earlier operas. And then we get to Verdi, and then we have full-on tenor soprano singing, an octave apart. Anyway, in Capuletti Montecchi, we have that beautiful, very similar voice types. And the role of Romeo has a fantastic aria cabaletta to open his role. One of my favorite caballettas ever written. And another really, really difficult cantilena for the Romeo, but not as hard as O Quante Volte. And there's a great duet for them, and then there's a bizarre random tenor aria that's also very good. So this is not the Bellini opera that gets performed all the time. If you're going to hear Bellini opera, you're probably going to hear Norma. But I think it's a great example of bel canto writing. I think that it's very sweet. We know the story. It doesn't go the same way the Shakespeare goes, or the same way that the Gounod goes, for that matter. But it's its own thing. And I think it's very charming. And if you are a fan of singing, it's a great thing to listen to.
This is a fantastic bracket.
There it is.
There it is. You can see it on our website as well. It's operaboxscore.com. Let us know, of course, what you think is missing from the bracket. Who should have made the cut? There's a couple teams titles that I think should be on here that are not. I will talk you through those on the show next week when we work through this bracket for you. 2-minute drill is now.
This just in. The 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
The Metropolitan Opera Orchestra has voted to accept temporary checks in exchange for returning to the negotiating table. This will be the first time the orchestra has been paid since the pandemic began, making the Met Orchestra the last major ensemble to secure a pandemic deal in the U.S. The deal came on the heels of a letter by Yannick Nézet-Séguin decrying the lack of paychecks for the musicians.
Composer Daniel Roumain's commission for Tulsa Opera's Greenwood Overcomes, commemorating the Tulsa Race Massacre, has been cancelled. Roumain refused to change the word damn in the phrase God Damn America at the end of a song written for Denise Graves. According to a statement from the Tulsa Opera, Graves said that the lyrics did not align with her personal values. Roumain claims that despite this, he never received a specific request from Graves to change the lyrics before being dismissed from the project.
Architect Jean Nouvel has won the design competition for the upcoming Shenzhen Opera House in China. Nouvel's design will integrate the building into the coastline with an unusual curved, transparent roofline, proving once and for all that opera house designers really did run out of ideas after designing the one in Sydney.
The Ryan Opera Center has announced 3 new fellowships in an effort to recruit more BIPOC artists, creating additional positions for a conductor-pianist, director, and stage manager. The conductor-pianist position will be added to the 21-22 ensemble, while the other 2 positions will be active in May 2022.
In trade news, Opernhaus Zurich has named Annette Weber as its new director of opera. Weber will take on the new position in September, replacing Michael Fichtenholz, who is under investigation for abuse.
Santa Fe Opera has announced the hiring of Mike von Artsen as a COVID-19 compliance safety manager for the 2021 season. Van Artsen will set guidelines for the company that include limited capacity, mask requirements, digital tickets, and 100 sanitizer stations. Santa Fe is currently set to open its season July 21st.
This week's Yellow Cards.
Spain. The Gran Teatre de Liceu will present Otello on March 27th, despite the rise of COVID-19 cases in Spain.
This week's Red Cards.
Austria. The Wiener Staatsoper has postponed its live stream of Parsifal due to the positive case of COVID-19 detected at the company.
Belgium. Opera Liège has cancelled its April performance of Verdi's I Lombardi as the country cracks down with restrictions to curb rising COVID cases.
Germany. Staatsoper Stuttgart will extend its closure until at least May 1st.
France. The French government has imposed a strict lockdown of Paris and 15 other departments across the country. The lockdown will last 4 weeks and will only allow essential businesses to be open.
Poland. The Polish government has shut down all theaters, opera houses, and shopping malls, saying that regional restrictions were not enough to stop the spread of COVID-19.
Exit stage right, French soprano Renée Doria has died at the age of 100. Her 40-year career included roles like Rosina, Lakme, and Pamina, and she made a number of notable recordings, among them Tales of Hoffmann, Thais, and Massenet's Sappho.
Russian bass Yevgeny Nesterenko has died at 84 from COVID-19. He had an international career, including 3 decades at the Bolshoi. He was considered to be the finest living Boris to sing Boris Godunov, and in 1981 he was awarded Italy's Golden Viotti Medal for his interpretation of that title role.
Des Moines Metro Opera announced that their founder and artistic director emeritus, Robert L. Larson, passed away peacefully on March 21. A company press release noted, quote, "The strength of his vision to bring quality performances to Iowa brought thousands of people to this magnificent art form, forever changing the lives of so many."
Bass baritone Luciano Di Pasquale has died at 57. He was known for his Mozart and Rossini roles, and had also been the artistic director of the Arte and Canto Festival in Basciano, Italy.
Conductor and sexual predator James Levine died on March 9th at age 77. He is survived by his longtime companion, Suzanne Thompson, whom he married last year.
And on this day, March 22nd, in 1842 was the birth of Carl Rosa, who's the founder of Manchester's Rosa Opera Company, which presented opera in English in London and in the British provinces. On this day in 1911, Herman Jadlovka became the first opera singer to perform 2 major roles in the same day at the Metropolitan Opera. Soprano, who originally was a mezzo-soprano, Marta Myrtle, was born on this day in 1912. Also born on this day in 1930, American musical theater composer Stephen Sondheim. In 1944, it was the destruction of the great opera house of Frankfurt when the city was destroyed by World War II air raids. Happy birthday also to English baritone Alan Opie, who was born this day in 1945. And in 1948, it was the birth of Stephen Sondheim's arch rival, British composer Andrew Lloyd Webber. Happy birthday also to American soprano Mary Jane Johnson, born in 1950. In 1978, it was the debut at the Met of American baritone Pablo Elvira in Verdi's Rigoletto, and closing it out with one for Weston in 1979, the first performance of Dominic Argento's Miss Havisham's Fire in New York City.
And that's your 2-minute drill. So, Matt, the negotiations at the Met are taking place via carrier pigeon?
I mean, I hope that everyone has learned that open letters are not the most efficient way to make change. Yes, there was an open letter from Yannick Nézet-Séguin, but I refuse to believe that open letter did more than his position as the music director of the orchestra in terms of getting people to the negotiating table.
It really is kind of wild to me that it's taken this long, because I feel like over the past few weeks, we've already started talking, hopefully not prematurely, knock on all the wood, about the light at the end of the tunnel, the pandemic, and so forth. But the Met really has been completely without pay. Many can't afford to live in New York City anymore for a whole year. And it's just remarkable that it's taken until now for enough things to come together for any kind of pay for them. And good luck. Hopefully they'll get a better deal than they currently, the Met wants to give them at this point.
Oliver Camacho, talk us through the ups and downs.
This is messy.
Tulsa Opera, yeah.
So we're recording on March 22nd, and on March 20th, composer Daniel Romaine posted, Tulsa Opera just decommissioned me. I was invited to compose a work for them. They offered $1,500 to create a new work for piano and voice, including any words I wanted to use. I wrote an aria called They Still Want to Kill Us on the race riots of 1921. I wrote the music and words. The last 2 lines are God bless America, God damn America. Tobias Picker suggested I omit the word damn. I refused, explaining that is how I felt about this country, so they fired me. That was what he said. Then the Tulsa Opera made their statement, and I'm not going to read their entire statement, but it went somewhere along the lines of, this was written specifically for Denise Graves, and Denise Graves didn't feel comfortable saying this, and we asked Daniel Romaine to consider changing that text, and he declined to. And so they are paying him for his work, but they are not performing this. And then shortly followed today a letter from the Black Opera Alliance. There's so many. This is we're not going to be finished talking about this, but that's where we are right now. So I think the Black Opera Alliance is coming on the side of composer Daniel Romaine, and it's just messy. I mean, this is an event that's supposed to commemorate the Tulsa massacre, and here is a white artistic director firing a Black composer. it's not a good look.
And particularly from a concert that was supposed to commemorate an event that has been overlooked by history because it was terrorism against Black people, and white American history doesn't like to commemorate that.
Yeah, I think Denise Graves, I understand, being uncomfortable with saying that and, voicing that as, as just as valid as, any other opinion on it. But I can't help but feel that even if that was really what happened, if they, I feel like there had to have been a better solution than to just basically say, okay, we're not performing it, goodbye. According to the composer, they never, there wasn't really a communication specifically asking for, from Denise Graves, I should say, a communication from her specifically asking to remove it. And I think there could have been a better conversation there between the two of them about why he wanted to keep it in, why she felt uncomfortable doing it. I feel like there was almost certainly a better solution here than to fire him, even if you're interpreting it as generously as possible.
So, Ashlee, is it that Denise Graves is being made the scapegoat here?
Thank you. That was my initial question, because, we hear from the composer. We then hear a follow-up statement from Tulsa where they say, Miss Graves was not comfortable performing this. The composer says, well, I never heard from Denise Graves. So my initial question, which I could really see going either way, was, did she, in fact, voice her discomfort about this? That was my first sort of moment of skepticism about it. In discussion with some of my colleagues, it seems to make sense that, she's got sort of some relatively, conservative things, and some of the things in her history might have let us, get to the place where it's like, oh, maybe she would have been uncomfortable with a phrase like that. Me, I was more worried that they were using that as a scapegoat to, appease some more conservative donors and board members in a relatively conservative area of the country. So I really don't know. But that was one of my first moments of skepticism about
and
their
actually,
statement.
I honestly wouldn't be surprised if it's some of both of those things. Personally, I do think that it would be surprising to me if Denise Graves had wanted to sing that text and they ended up cutting it. Like the fact that the fact that the decision was made against allowing this poetry says that on some levels she wasn't in favor of it. I mean,
Totally fair.
There's a wide range of, reactions to that where between I absolutely won't do this ever or this wouldn't have been me. And it's interesting that this is the exact that this God Bless America, Goddamn America is saying is, this is straight out of the first presidential campaign. There was a huge controversy about his pastor, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, saying something like this in a sermon. And I do think that a lot of this just comes down to a fundamental disconnect of not understanding where this emotion is coming from on the part of the white people who are in the audience. And it's disappointing to me that we will not have the opportunity to make a case for why this is a strong poetic statement and, what the meaning behind it is, where is this composer coming from? Why is he saying this? If we believe in freedom of speech, we should be willing to hear him out and, exercise some empathy about why that might be the situation here.
So the Black Opera Alliance says something I think that really makes an excellent point. The company hides behind a quotation from a Black woman instead of offering a direct response from Mr. Picker, who had been in touch with Mr. Romaine over the course of these events. Unfortunately, this insidious tactic to pit Black people against each other is one to which we have grown accustomed. We reject it. Mr. McConnell, Mr. Picker, and Tulsa Opera should have honored both Miss Graves' personal preference and Mr. Romaine's personal creation by hiring an additional singer who would perform the aria as commissioned.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll see what kind of space this takes up in the coming days and weeks. James Levine died at the beginning of March. We just found out about it last week.
Like as soon as we finished the episode, like the moment.
Yeah. There's like OBS bump and there's OBS curse as well. Ashlee, how are we gonna get into this one?
I know you might be expecting sort of a trademarked Ashlee Hardgrave rant here, and you'll get one, but it's a little weary and subdued. you'll notice the way I read the news item. If that upsets you, I encourage you to do some deep work and some deep homework on the circumstances, because we have too much evidence and too many reports for any of that to be construed as anything but an actual factual account. This was hard for me personally, not because of the loss and the passing of a person who actually did at one point have a really deep impact on my life. It was hard because I was reminded of how sad and betrayed I felt when I got a real understanding of what the initial allegations were about him. And I was even further saddened and further betrayed this week when I saw how it was reported and reflected on by all of the different areas and corners of the opera industry. There were some people that lauded his career in moves that didn't surprise anybody. There were folks that offered up retrospectives of him that were, in my opinion, in incredibly poor taste. We've looked at a couple of different things when it comes to the passing of Levine, which, like George said, happened on the 9th of March, but we just found out about it last week on St. Patrick's Day. There's no correlation there. It just happened to all happen the same day. Michael Broder wrote in the Washington Post this article about sort of the myth of the person versus who's passing. But I was bothered by something that he said when he talked about sort of the demise of his career. He mentions, the Met cast him out. No sugar. They paid him off to the tune of $3.5 million and are part of the reason that now orchestra members can't feed their kids. I lean a little more towards the assessment of Kenneth Woods, who said Levine was not a great, he wasn't a great man with a single tragic flaw. He was an almost completely horrible person with a single tragic talent. I will never besmirch the musical ability and the musical offerings that Levine gave as an artist. I will always speak about the abhorrence of his behavior and the abhorrence of the indifference to generations of opera industry professionals who did nothing and saw things and said nothing. We like to bark a lot about culture wars and cancel culture, myself included. But here's the thing. Cancel culture is, when you get down to it, it's just accountability for abhorrent behavior that you thought you got away with. Or it's behavior that you didn't think was all that bad, but now that you're being told that it's not okay, you're just annoyed about being corrected. We're seeing these culture wars everywhere, and we're paying so much attention to the warriors that we're not addressing the wounded. And in a moment like this, we're all wounded, some of us more than others. Those boys, those victims, those children, we will never be able to fix them. We will never be able to give them back part of the innocence and the lack of humiliation that they had before their encounter with this man. He was one of my musical heroes. I've spoken on this show before about, seeing Beverly Sills on television and in radio. She was my idea of what an opera singer was. James Levine was the first conductor that I ever saw. And I knew, that was my caricature of what a conductor was. And I grew up in an industry and in a conservatory setting that was telling me about how much of an artist and a creator and a master he was. Well, all of a sudden there's this worst kept secret in the whole world that's just sliding by at the bottom, but everybody, including myself, was instructed to not pay any attention to it. Then I got to meet the man, and it was one of the most emotional experiences for me. I felt like I was at my musical pinnacle because I was going to get to be under his baton, and that first rehearsal for me was a religious experience. Not 1 year later, the Met finally decided to acknowledge what they've known for decades. And we're seeing all of that again this week. And it makes me sad.
Zoe Madonna's piece in the Boston Globe and Kenneth Woods' piece, I think that's just his personal blog, are sort of where I think Ashlee and I don't want to speak for the rest of you, where we sort of fall yeah, that tracks. That's the take. And, I don't want to not add something to the conversation, but just to quote Zoe Madonna, a culture of intimidation and silence that elevates a few to genius savior status and leaves everyone else to either fall in line or fall to the bottom. That is so spot on. And we've talked before on the show how there's like this hero worship of what are typically older white men who have been the gatekeepers in opera for so long. And as a result of that, we have this sort of like this mafia of gay men, and not all gay men, but, of men controlling things in opera, and women and people of color being pushed to the sidelines. And, had James Levine been outed a long time ago and had this been put to an end, who knows where the orchestra would be? I mean, like, people talk about what a great conductor he is and what he did for the Met Orchestra. But are they really that great because of him? Or are they great because it is one of the hardest jobs to get in the world, And yes, he did things to elevate American singers, namely people like Dawn Upshaw and Kathleen Battle. But don't discredit Dawn Upshaw and Kathleen Battle. They also worked really hard to develop their skill and their artistry, He gave them a platform, but they did the work.
And just to summarize, when you're looking back at a career and a life and the lives that life touched, it cannot be an afterthought to discuss the harm that was done. It's not a, It should really be the lead at this point in time, given everything that we know and given how many lives were negatively affected by this behavior and by the enabling of this behavior. That's not nothing. There are many questions in this world that are complicated about what to do in situations that live in the gray area. This one is not in gray area for me. I will say, where there has been a vacuum of leadership for a long time in the arts world, we are seeing some early steps to correct it with this new initiative from the Lyric Opera of Chicago to expand their Ryan Opera Center to through an inclusion and diversity and equity initiative to build up more leaders of color and from underserved communities, not just singers. We love singers of color. It's great, but to have that always be directed by a white man, conducted by a white man, it does not have the same effect.
Weston, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to rant about opera houses. Go.
I'll do a little mood shift here. All right, so if I have to see one more opera house that's been built on the water that kind of looks like a boat or a sail or whatever, I think I might scream. There's nothing wrong with it per se. It's really cool and beautiful and whatever, but it's not innovative. It just looks expensive, and I think that opera houses really need to start moving away from the look how big and fancy and exclusive and separate from you poors we are, And that's all I have to say on the matter.
Perfectly timed. Robert L. Larson at Des Moines Metro Opera died earlier this week. He was the conductor and stage director for every one of the almost 120 productions that the company did in its first 40 seasons. 120 operas. Robert Larson has directed more operas than I've had hot dinners. I'm going to put it like that. What I love is that instead of flowers, memorial contributions can be made to a scenic fund, which provides annual support for the design and construction of new scenery and original productions each year.
Sweet.
What a grand gesture. Let us wrap this show up.
Good call. Bad call on Opera Box Score.
Good call, bad call. We'll throw the ball around the horn here. We're going to go with Oliver Camacho to start off with. A good call or a bad call?
So I saw Chicago Opera Theater's Vanguard Opera concert presentation of Matthew Recios and Royce Babrick, friend of the show, puppy episode, which is basically a coming out story. And it has to do with Ellen DeGeneres's coming out, and I didn't know that going into it. And oh my gosh, Alexandra Lobianco was the character called the comedian, and I've heard that name for a while now, but I've actually never heard her sing. Man,
she's spectacular.
What a voice! Yeah. Holy moly! And one of the most touching scenes between two male singers. the two gay characters, I forget their names at this point, but sung by Justin Berkowitz and Evan Bravos. Such a sweet scene. I was just thinking as I was watching this, if I was, a teenager studying voice, looking at repertoire, and I was exposed to this piece, this is the type of music I would want to do, because it was so impactful and so sincere. I loved it, and I cannot wait for this show to get on its feet and for colleges and whatnot to be putting this on, because it's gonna have legs. It's a really, really great show.
Almost nothing surprises Oliver Camacho, but when it does, I love watching his face. Don't you, Weston? Matt Cummings, You got a good call or a bad call?
I got a good call and a bad call.
Okay.
Starting off with a good call for the epic troll from classical musician Jennifer Wu, who made over her Twitter account to look like the Metropolitan Opera's official account and tweet on March 17th that in commemoration of the horrific shootings that took place in Atlanta and the passing of James Levine, the Met would be streaming a production of Madame Butterfly starring Anna Netrebko, conducted by James Levine, in a condemnation of violence against Asians, saying that racism has no place in the arts. That obviously is not what they showed. It's obviously not what they were doing. It is just tone deaf enough to seem like it could have been coming out of the Met socials.
I saw lots of people who thought it was absolutely real, with good reason.
It was so convincing that the Met did have to put out a statement saying that it was fake, and the bad call goes to Twitter for suspending Jennifer Wu's Twitter account.
And they did cancel the performance, which was supposed to be Anna Bolena that night. They just went dark for one night.
Ashlee Hardgrave.
Whoops. It's as you can tell, it's been a little bit of a heavy week. Lots been going on, and so I've been trying to find ways to sort of chase joy and lighten the levels of my heart and my soul. And one of the ways I did that was by going to get my first COVID shot, which ended up giving me even more emotions that I was also not prepared to process. And so I had to go even lighter with the things that were giving me joy. And I delved back into the world of K-pop that I don't usually visit. It's okay. Yes. BTS's Dynamite. That is a bop. It is a jam. It slaps. I've listened to it no less than 50 times in the last 7 calendar days. So thank you, BTS, for making my life better. Good call on all of you. Yay, K-pop.
I got a good call and a bad call. Good call is that I got to be part of my son's 5th grade class March Madness group with my own bracket. Bad call is that I am literally dead last in the pool. That's it for this week's edition of America's Talk radio show about opera. Our announcer's Norm Woodel. He's at normwoodel.com. On Facebook, search for Opera Box Score. On Twitter and Instagram, we're at Opera Box Score. Help us deepen our bench of listeners by liking and sharing our social media posts. Email us at operaboxscore@gmail.com. Subscribe to that podcast. It's on Stitcher. Just favorite our show on Apple Podcasts. The views and opinions expressed on Opera Box Score are solely those of the show's creative team. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of the accounts of this show without the express written consent of Opera Box Score is, well, you'll be sorry. Not sorry! Our creative consultant is Oliver Camacho. Our audio and video editor is Weston Williams. For your co-hosts, Matt Cummings and Ashlee Hardgrave, I'm George Cederquist, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as your bracket gets wrecked. We're back with an all-new show next week. Carrie Ann Matheson from the San Francisco Opera Center joins us inside the huddle, we promise. This time it's really happening. And we play out the March Madness opera bracket to crown a champ. Plus you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, more spring in your step. Join us.